In this video, we will be discussing the history of Stepford Express. The first ever intercity services in Stepford didn't open with Express in the 80s, but rather with the Greater Stepford Railway in the 1920s. The first intercity services ran between Stepford, Leighton and Benton, and not really beyond that. They used steam locomotives, and at one point they even used the Flying Scotsman. By 1941, the GSR ended all intercity services operations and didn't bring them back. By the time the 50s arrived, Stepford Connect had largely revived large parts of the network, and they also began operating intercity services, from Stepford Central to Leighton via Benton, and then eventually extending to Lynn. By the late 70s, however, Connect was very stressed, with it having to run all intercity, semi-fast and regional services across every part of the network except for the airport and waterline. However, a new operator came to the rescue. Assuming a large amount of Connect's express stock, in 1979, Stepford Express opened up between Stepford Central and Leighton City, stopping at St Helens Bridge, Benton and Leighton Stepford Road. Soon enough, they ditched most of their Connect stock and got new Class 43 trains with Mark III carriages for consists. The next year, they opened services to Lynn by the Sea via Edgemead, Westercoast, West Wyvern and North Shore, fully taking over all intercity services from Connect. The growth didn't really stop there, as in 1981, for some odd reason, maybe because Toby was doing some nose candy again, Express started running to Rayleigh Bay alongside Stepford Connect. This was a rather strange decision, and no one elaborated as to why it was cleared onto such a short branch. But oh well, it's not that bad. I'm sure this won't ever happen again. In 1990, Express started using the Morganstown line, stopping at Ellesmere Junction and Morganstown. This also cut times on the Lynn Superfast by about a minute, and it allowed for additional interchanges with Connect and Airlink services on the Morganstown line. 3 years later, a shuttle bridge was built for Waterline to get from Morganstown to Morganstown Docks. I'm sure this won't affect Express at all, aside from the minor disruptions during the shuttle bridge's construction. Surprise, surprise, it's 1995, and Express now runs to Newry Harbour via the Morganstown shuttle bridge. What a confusing time to be alive. A new, even less sensible route than the entire Newry branch was also made, from Benton to Lynn by the Sea via Morganstown. Truly a wonderful time to be alive. Express trains now stop at Benton, Eden Quay, Newry and Newry Harbour, with Eden Quay being the least used and least sensible station on the entire Express network. If this move did anything, it just drove up Waterline's delay repay fees, but also angered Express passengers, as they expected a short journey to Newry, but then had to be stuck behind a pacer. Crowded Class 220s and 221s would soon enough become a common sight, getting stuck behind nearly empty pacers for most of their time on the Newry line. Express was getting tired of their locomotive stock, and in 1999 they ordered their first large batch of DMUs and EMUs in the biggest acquisition in history. The orders were sent for Alstom, Bombardier and Fiat Ferrovaria for Class 180, 220, 221 and 390 trains. This cost Express a lot of money, and we'll see if it pays off. The first of these to arrive were the Class 220 units in the middle of 2001, and they were good, when they weren't heavily overcrowded. The next train was the Class 180 in December of 2001, which was questionable at best. It started breaking down and catching fire very quickly, and rapidly it became the most unreliable train in the entirety of Stepford. Its reputation quickly led to them being the least used train, as most just hung around in the depot or in maintenance. In 2002, the Class 221 and 390 trains would arrive, both with tilting capabilities. The Class 221s became notorious for, well, their overcrowding problems, just like the 220. However, the 9 and 11 car Class 390s quickly became known as the longest trains in Stepford, buzzing up and down through the countryside at unimaginable speeds along the electrified main line, with a full 8 degrees of tilt to make sure that any curves that were on the main line were really smooth. Express didn't really feel like getting new trains from this point, and the rolling stock situation would be the same all the way until 2015. In 2015, Express contacted the Japanese manufacturer Hitachi for multiple trains, labeled the Class 800 and 801. They were also known as Azumas because they came from the east, and Azuma means east. The first of these trains began construction the same year. Express also ordered Class 397 units from CAF. These trains all arrived at nearly the same time, so let's look at how that went, starting off with the ATX trains. We're in for a wild ride with this one. So, the 800 is a bi-mode train, and the 801 is an electric train. These trains both started operating in 2019 at around the same time, in 5-car variants, 9-car variants, and 5-car doubles. Unfortunately, about a month after launch, most of the trains had their seat fabric slowly disintegrating. Aside from the already somewhat uncomfortable makeup of the seats, they had now started literally disappearing. Express contacted Hitachi about this, and the only real solution they had was to just swap the seats every few months. Airlink's Class 802s also had the same problem. These issues would later be solved on the Class 803, 805, 807 and 810 trains, however these aren't in use in Stepford. The reputation of Express was decently compromised as a result. You see, because they bought so many ATX trains, they became the most common on the operator, and it isn't really good for the brand when the most frequent of your trains is the most uncomfortable one. The problem got so bad over time that Express had to wheel out their unreliable Class 180 units to cover for the pure amount of maintenance they had to do with the ATX trains. In November of 2019, the Class 397-0 arrived. These trains weren't as comfortable as the 390s and HSTs, however, they were better than the ATX trains. Express also became the second ever operator to put these trains into double formation, a few days after Airlink had already done the same with their 397-1 trains. During the pandemic, Express had an okay time. Their cash reserves weren't as big as Airlink's due to all the new trains, but they also weren't in a waterline situation. They pushed through 2020, and in 2021 they didn't really have any worries, as all of the restrictions were relaxed. In 2023, Express refurbished most of their older stock, namely the HSTs, 180s, Voyagers, and Pendolinos. This also cost the network a decent amount, but they jacked up their fares so high they were able to cover it. The next year, in 2024, something really strange happened. For the entirety of April 1st, Express only had Class 143 Pacers repainted from waterline. Yep, you heard that right. God-awful trains became the staple of Express's fleet for a day, and they could only go up to 75 miles an hour. I've seen metros run faster than this. In present day, Stepford Express is a vital, well, not really vital, more of a secondary part of the network. The Class 180 is so unreliable that it could form a black hole at any moment. However, it does have a new special livery that looks really cool. And the Class 221s are so crowded, you're better off taking a 156 with its questionable seating. That's it for this video. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe. New video next week. Thanks for watching. See ya.